Who are the key players to watch for in the upcoming matchup between the Louisville Cardinals and the Syracuse Orange? We will identify and discuss on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. Also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to say thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, including YouTube and now WHAS 11 Plus, 5 days a week, your team every day. We're talking about the key players to watch for the Louisville Cardinals and the Syracuse Orange in the upcoming season opener on Saturday evening. We will do two players for both Louisville's offense and Louisville's defense, and then two players, one for the Syracuse offense, one for the Syracuse defense. Quickly running through that list, offensively for Louisville, it's running back Tiyon Evans and tight end Marshon Ford. Defensively, it's linebacker Momo Sanogo and defensive tackle Dez Tell. And then for Syracuse, it is running back Sean Tucker and linebacker Michael Jones. So we'll start out with the Cardinals offense. A lot of different ways we could have gone for this one. A lot of people probably would have said Malik Cunningham. Yeah, of course. When is the quarterback never a player to watch for an opposing or for a respective offense? If you paid attention to the show last fall, shout out to those that have been paying attention since before the Locked On Louisville podcast hit the YouTube streaming. You'll remember something that I used to say kind of as a punchline almost, that I used to say every single week when we talked about the players to watch, and that's the fact that I don't like including quarterbacks in the players to watch for because it's obvious. It's a given. You obviously know that the quarterbacks are going to be those that you're going to watch for. So I try to go away from selecting quarterbacks unless it is extremely necessary and context calls for it. So for the Louisville offense, it's running back Taiwan Evans and tight end Marshon Ford. Evans, the Tennessee transfer, will be making his debut for the Cardinals. Last season, 525 yards on the ground for the Tennessee Volunteers, 6 touchdowns. That equates out to 6.5 yards per carry on 81 total attempts. Also had 4 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown. The first official depth chart has been released ahead of the season opener. The Cardinals have listed Taiwan Evans as the starter in the running back committee. Now, obviously, a couple different ways you can look at this. As I mentioned when I talk about the running backs, Scott Satterfield has been known to play a handful of running backs. He even said in his press conference on Monday. No, my Lord, on Tuesday. I'm completely all over the place. I'm losing track of my days. He said on Tuesday that he would, quote unquote, not be surprised to see all 4 running backs playing snaps in the first game against Syracuse. So either A, Scott Satterfield is not tipping his hand yet, or B, he truly means it. And I am kind of inclined to believe the latter because of how Louisville likes to ride the hot hand, utilize matchups, things of that nature. But Taiwan Evans is the running back in he's the running back in the group that I'm focusing on in this one. He's the number one player on offense that I'm looking at and the key player to watch because we've heard in the offseason, we've heard in fall season camp that he's explosive. He perhaps has the highest ceiling of any of the running backs on the roster, and he has the ability to transform the offense. I remember someone close to the program kind of telling me that it almost had Michael Dyer vibes, former SEC running back coming into Louisville, not the biggest guy, uses explosiveness and low center of gravity to really give the opposing defense problems. So he's the guy that I'm looking at here offensively because he could transform this Louisville offense to a different level. Now, not to say that Jalen Mitchell, Travion Cooley, Hassan Hall, and even Javian Hawkins haven't been explosive enough to do that. I'm not saying that at all, so please don't take it that way. But it seems like with the way that people that have been observing fall camp have been saying is that they made an upgrade over last year. The running back room is better this season. All eyes now are on Tiyon Evans because you know what you're going to get from Jalen Mitchell, primarily a strength back with deceptive speed. You know what you're going to get from Travion Cooley. Jawar Jordan, you have a decent idea what you're going to get with a change of pace speed back, a guy that you saw more so toward the latter half of the season in that Syracuse game, the Duke game, so on and so forth. But you haven't seen Tiyon Evans take a snap. Tennessee fans will tell you that, he was explosive when he was on the field last year for the Volunteers, had some big-time games against some solid opponents. But the main thing is for Louisville is I want to see that chemistry between Cunningham and Tiyon Evans. And more importantly, I want to see what that read option looks like. I want to see what he's able to do in this Cardinals offense with this solid offensive line, with one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country. So just overall, extremely, extremely excited. He's the player that I'm focusing on the most here, mainly due to the fact because he's a new face, but also because there's very high expectations that are being placed on him, and he is listed as the starter. So obviously, the coaching staff is seeing some very positive things. And if you're being listed as the starter over a group that also includes Jalen Mitchell, Travion Cooley, and Jawar Jordan, then obviously high expectations are going to be placed. The other player that I'm focusing on, the key player to watch, is Marshon Ford, the tight end. Last year had 550 yards receiving, which was a career high, but only had 2 touchdowns. Had 11.2 yards per reception. I know that, he was more involved in some games rather than others. And, sometimes that's a byproduct of Malik Cunningham and the Louisville offense getting what they're getting on the ground and being mainly a run dominant offense. Or, sometimes it's just spreading the ball out more. Marshon Ford's number hasn't been called as much as it was in certain games. So, I think that the Louisville offense needs to make it a point to get Marshon Ford the ball early and often in this game for a couple of reasons. Number one, because he is one of the best tight ends in college football. As I mentioned, he's too big for opposing defensive backs to guard him, but he's too quick for opposing linebackers to guard him. So a Swiss Army knife, a jack of all trades, if you will, used in the backfield, been used out wide in certain circumstances as a traditional tight end, so on and so forth. I think they need to use that mismatch that Marshon Ford grants them. And also reason number 2 is the fact that they have a lot of unproven guys at the wide receiver position. Now, like I said, I think that Tyler Hudson, D. Wiggins are going to be very, very solid transfer additions. But you have Braden Smith coming off of a major injury. Josh Johnson isn't listed on the depth chart currently. That's not saying he won't play, but he's not listed. You have Amari Huggins-Bruce, who's going to be a star, and then you have Jalen Carter, Elijah Downing, Chris Bell, Chance Morrow, who really haven't proven themselves at this level, Power 5 football. So you have a security blanket in Marshon Ford, and it would be wise for Malik Cunningham to really use him in the first half early and often. Like I said, get him the ball, because when Marshon Ford gets the ball, usually good things happen. So and I'll keep beating this drum all season long, and you'll probably get tired of it because you'll hear me say, well, Marshon Ford is the player to watch. You need to get the ball to Marshon Ford. But, I mean, am I wrong, though? Marshon Ford has shown that he is able to make something out of nothing, is a guy that can create mismatches, is a solid route runner, even better than what people want to give him credit for. And this is really, truthfully, a money year for a lot of people, for a lot of Louisville Cardinals that are looking to improve their draft stock. Marshon Ford's one of those guys, and I truly think that he is a player with an NFL future ready for him after this season, because of not only his ability to block, but just the mismatch that he provides. as a tight end, and he kind of fits the mold that the NFL is looking for of a more athletic pass catcher rather than just a guy who's used as a traditional blocker. So, in my opinion here, Marshawn Ford is a guy to watch for. So is Tiyon Evans, two very explosive guys. It would not surprise me to see one of, if not both of these players in the end zone in this matchup against Syracuse. And we'll continue to discuss the Cardinals offense as the week goes along. But switching over into the Cardinals defense, where my key players to watch are linebacker Momo Sanogo and defensive lineman Dez Tell. We're going to discuss both of those players here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all of the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week's games. BetOnline is also your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. I know if you've been watching the show or listening to the show over the past couple of days, you've heard the news. But for those who have not, I have purchased a green screen for this bland background behind me. So I appreciate everyone for sticking it out, for having to look at me with a light background for the past couple of months. I'm not sure when Amazon will be delivering that, but hey, look, we do have a green screen on the way. Very excited to test that out and very excited to share the news. So, but also very, very excited for the Louisville defense this year. I know that some people kind of have mixed feelings about the defense because of maybe formation or playing style or things of that nature. I'm not here to talk about that right now. I want to talk about the key players to watch for the Cardinals defense. That is Momo Sanogo and Dez Tell, looking to prove themselves, but both players looking to prove themselves in different ways. Momo Sanogo has already proven himself at the Power 5 level, has played 5 years for the Mississippi Rebels. This will be his final year of college eligibility. Overall in his career has accumulated, I think he has gotten over the 100 tackle mark. I'll have to, well, he had 112 in 2018. So obviously 2020 he had 60. 2021 he only had 25. So he looks to get a change of scenery here at Louisville. He's listed as the starter at one of the middle linebacking positions outside of Monty Montgomery. The 6'1", 235-pound native of Plano, Texas, is going to be relied upon to handle a lot of the workload at the middle linebacking position. Obviously, having Monty Montgomery back healthy and playing solid in fall camp is huge news for the Louisville Cardinals after he went down with a season-ending injury in the third game of the year last season against the Central Florida Knights. Now he is back, but he has a new running mate in Momo Sanogo, a guy that has played a ton of Power 5 Division I football. They're going to rely upon his leadership. No CJ Avery this year, so they're going to have to find the leadership in different places. All accounts coming out of fall camp is that Momo looks solid. He's being a leader on the field. He's been very vocal, and I think that they're going to really need his ability to be solid in coverage to be able to, kind of fit the contrast and skill set between he and Monty Montgomery, as I view Monty as more of a hybrid linebacker that is solid in the run defense and solid at getting after the quarterback. I think Momo is going to be a little bit better in coverage, and I think that that's going to be big in guarding some of the smaller receivers, some of the tight ends, especially in third down situations, and replacing CJ Avery, not necessarily outright in that same position, because I know that that's sort of the job of Ben Perry or Marvin Dallas, but you can never have too many guys that are solid in coverage. So solid linebacking play is of the utmost importance for the Louisville Cardinals this season, because not only does it help solid run defense, continuing that aspect of the Louisville defense, but also trying to improve that passing defense that had a little bit to be desired in third down situations last season. So that's one to focus on here. And like Tiyon Evans, A lot of these guys are faces that we are familiar with. Yahya Diaby, Yasir Abdullah, Monty Montgomery, even Ben Perry, a guy that we know about. He's a player that he was a player that I had kind of pondered in this discussion. And I guess if there was a third defensive player, it would be Ben Perry. But you know what Marvin's Dallas gives you: KJ Cloyd, Jalen Alderman, Dorian Jones, TJ Quinn, all guys that you're familiar with. But now you have a guy coming in from Mississippi that's produced at the Power 5 level, and he was brought in to do just that here at Louisville. So all eyes are on Momo Sanogo here in the first game of the season against Syracuse. His work is going to be cut out for him with the dynamic 1-2 punch of Garrett Schrader and Sean Tucker. So the other defensive player to focus on, and maybe this is maybe a little bit more important for the Cardinals, is defensive lineman Dez Tell, listed as maybe a surprise starter at the nose tackle position, notably over Arizona State defensive line transfer Jermaine Lowell, who over the past couple of seasons has turned himself into one of the best interior defensive linemen in the country. He did come into the program late, and it was alluded to in the various press conferences over the past week or so that he's been kind of dealing with an injury, but he's getting healthy again, and they're going to continue to battle for that spot. But it's nice to see the work that Dez Tell is putting in to land him here number one on the depth chart. Tell is, like I said, proving himself for a different reason. Doesn't have a lot of college production last year, only 3 solo tackles, 9 tackles total. Had 5 the year before. The 6'1", 296-pound native of Stockbridge, Georgia, is looking to improve that Louisville defense from the interior. They saw big strides as a defense last year on the outside in terms of pass rushing, with Yahya Diaby and Ashton Gelati taking those next step forward as a defense. But now it's about getting that production from the interior. Obviously, we are going to see Jermaine Lowell play a big role this season, but I'm interested now, the fact that Dez Tell listed as the starter. This is a great opportunity from him to set the tone for the interior defensive line here at Louisville. It's a great chance for him to prove himself, to prove that, hey, look, I'm not the starter because Jermaine Lowell came in late and he is a little banged up. I'm the starter because I've worked my tail off and I've put in that work and I've improved and I deserve this. And that's what he's looking to prove week 1 against the Syracuse Orange. And they're doing so against an offensive line that didn't necessarily protect Garrett Schrader all that well last year, but they do have some returning pieces. But they have a very dynamic running game that the Cardinals successfully limited last year enough to get the Orange out of the game. But Garrett Schrader and Sean Tucker are going to be 2 tall tasks for the Louisville defense to try to guard on the ground. And it all starts with the interior defensive line. If you can get that disruption, not only from the outside in the pass rushing situation off the edge, but also on the interior to where you blow plays up at the line of scrimmage, you get into the backfield, you really make life tough for Schrader, Tucker, and all of the other opposing Syracuse ball handlers. Look, it's going to be interesting to see the rotation that Mark Ivy, Brian Brown, Wesley McGriff have at the defensive line, especially on the interior. But I think that Dez Tell is the one to focus on there. And like I said, Momo Sanogo, the other key defensive player to watch for the Louisville defense. So I do want to take a step back now, go to the opposition, talk about the Syracuse players to watch. That is running back Sean Tucker, linebacker Michael Jones. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. Obviously, if you're watching this on various streaming services or listening to this on various streaming services as well, you're not going to hear the audio implemented advertisements that you would if you're listening to certain other ones. So just stay tuned. But heading into the third segment, the Syracuse Orange have a handful of players returning that are going to be key to watch for. 2 of them in particular: running back Sean Tucker, linebacker Michael Jones. Sean Tucker, this season, simply put, is not being talked about enough as one of the best returning running backs in the country. Very dynamic last season, 246 rushes for 1,496 yards, 12 touchdowns, 6.1 yards per attempt. I think he ran for 95 yards against the Cardinals, but even then, it kind of felt like he didn't necessarily have the game that many were expecting him to have, which is a testament to how good he has been, to where 90 yards doesn't seem like enough for Sean Tucker. He's the player that, frankly, scares me the most on this Syracuse offense, because he showed last season that he can completely take over a game by himself, ranking in the top 10, maybe even, I had to go back and look, I think the top 5 in rushing in the country. One of the best running backs in the country, rushed for over 150 yards various times last season, and ultimately didn't necessarily have that great of a into the season, but only rushed for under 100 yards in 3 of the games last year for the Orange. So Sean Tucker, the player to watch for on the offensive end for the Orange, 5'10", 205-pound native from Owings Mills, Maryland. I think that this is pretty straightforward, because the Syracuse offense, despite having a new offensive coordinator that's looking to go a little bit more up-tempo and shift things up to where they're throwing the ball a little bit more, I think that their bread and butter is the running game. They're going to try to rely upon that to set up the pass, and the player to watch for the Orange that they're trying to get going is going to be Sean Tucker. If Louisville allows Sean Tucker to get into that second level of the defense, it could be a long night for the Louisville defense. It could end up being a high-scoring game. So all eyes are on the star running back for the Orange. Defensively, it's Michael Jones for a couple reasons. Number one, because he is the leading tackler for the Orange. Last season had 109 tackles. 6'1", 224-pound junior from Miami, Florida, is one of the leaders from this Syracuse defense, a veteran guy who's played 3 years in Dino Babers' system over the past 2 seasons. Over 60 tackles each season, had 3 sacks last year, a fumble recovery, forced 3 fumbles the year before. They've got some linebackers coming back, but he seems to be the leader of the defense, a guy that is solid in coverage, but also very good at getting after opposing ball carriers as well. Also, a little bit of bulletin board material. I know at media days, players say some things, they make some comments that get blown up a little bit on social media, and teams have fun with it. Michael Jones made a comment on whether or not it was meant this way, intended this way or not. It came off this way to the Louisville fan base and even to some of the Louisville players. At media day, was asked about facing Malik Cunningham week 1 at home. He says, and I quote, "I don't see it as much of a challenge." Now, obviously, this may have been said from a spot of confidence, to where he feels like, I have enough confidence in my defense to where regardless of what happens, I don't care who we face, I feel like we're going to fare well. Or he could have meant it as a thing of, okay, we feel good about playing against Malik Cunningham. I feel like it may have been intended in the former way, but it was definitely taken and interpreted in the latter. And it was taken as a shot at the Louisville offense, at Malik Cunningham. Obviously, the Louisville fan base had a field day, considering the fact that Malik Cunningham last year, in a 41-3 rout of the Syracuse Orange on the Lamar Jackson Day at Cardinal Stadium last November, he had 4 touchdowns in the first half. The Cardinals had 35 points, and the game was over at halftime. And he didn't even play the whole game. So Malik Cunningham, and as we mentioned on yesterday's show, has had a ton of success. I know 2020 was probably a performance left to be desired, but 2019, solid game. 2021, very, very solid game. And Malik Cunningham has had a ton of success against Syracuse overall. So it was a very interesting comment that Michael Jones made. So regardless of his intention, whether he intended it to be taken that way, it was taken that way. And on top of him being the leading tackler, returning for the Syracuse defense that is being tasked with stopping one of the better offenses in the country, or not in the country, I'm sorry, in the conference. Who knows, might even be in the country as well, with a lot of pieces returning, a solid veteran offensive line, a great running back room, a dynamic dual threat quarterback. one of the best tight ends in the country, and some dynamic players at the wide receiver position. The Syracuse defense is going to have their hands full. They've got some talent on that side of the ball, but nonetheless, it will be a battle. They will look for Michael Jones to lead them. Against the Cardinals, 8 o'clock. I think it's 8 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock kickoff. I think it's 8 o'clock. Primetime game on the ACC network, a home game for the Syracuse Orange. So ultimately, in this one, Tiyon Evans, Marshon Ford, the offensive players to focus on here for the Louisville Cardinals. Momo Sanogo, Dez Tell on the defensive side, who we are keeping an eye on. For the Syracuse Orange, it is running back Sean Tucker, linebacker Michael Jones. We'll have another episode today talking about Syracuse as a whole, why that this is a very, very important game for the Cardinals, even more so than any regular season opener. But before we get out of here, I want to say thank you all once again for making us your first listen of the day. Do yourself a favor. Go make Locked On ACC your second listen. That podcast hosted by Candace Cooper does a great job of covering the conference as a whole. No better way to get all your conference news ahead of week one's action this upcoming weekend than the Locked On ACC podcast hosted by Candace Cooper. But that's going to wrap up this first edition on this Wednesday of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here very soon.